It is our pleasure to welcome Suzanne Bullitt, Head of Global Trade, Anti-Bribery and Compliance for the Coca-Cola Company, where she leads Coca-Cola's Trade, Sanctions, Anti-Bribery and Ethics and Compliance program. An accomplished compliance professional with experience in global trade, ethics and compliance, she brings over 28 years of experience to the table. Ms. Bullitt says, "The world is moving fast and our organizations are moving faster. As a compliance professional, our role is to create a multi-year compliance strategy not only dedicated to developing and implementing comprehensive compliance programs, but creating programs that are both agile and scalable as the world and our organizations change."
Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I hope you are having a great day and are enjoying the conference. Many thanks to the committee for asking me to speak today. I'm very much looking forward to discussing this topic with you, and I'm very excited to be part of this year's conference. So as you all can see, I am not broadcasting from the studio, but from my home in the United States. So I'm Suzanne Bullitt. I head up the ethics and compliance team here for Coca-Cola. And Coca-Cola is based out of Atlanta, Georgia. I am actually out of my home in Charleston, South Carolina. So greetings from across the pond to you all. And I'm looking forward to getting started today. So before we kick off, I do have to mention that some of the opinions expressed here are obviously not those of Coca-Cola. They are of my own, and they may not represent Coca-Cola or its board. So let's talk about the world today, which is probably a little bit different than we've been talking about for the last couple days. But clearly, the world is changing, and it's changing very quickly. In the last 5 years, it's safe to say that political sentiment has changed across the globe. The political sentiment is more dynamic. It is ever fast and ever moving. And it is a changing world, right? And so it is also safe to say that the last maybe 8 to 10 years ago, the dynamics across the world were a little bit different. We were seeing at that time more of a shift towards globalization, more international cooperation, different countries and different communities connecting across the globe. From an economic perspective, a political perspective, and even a cultural perspective. But that's a little bit different now. In the last 5 years, it's been a little bit difficult to navigate, right? We've seen a lot of different activities taking place from a political perspective, and that has made the dynamics for our compliance programs change quite a bit. Right. So as we saw that move towards globalization, we often question, is that still the move, right? Is globalization still a concept, or are we shifting away from that and becoming ever more separated, right? In our policies and in our processes and in our world dynamics. And so in the last few years, we've seen everything from Brexit, right? We have seen U.S. foreign policy change considerably. We've had several different administrations in the United States come forward, and it is safe to say, again, that they've had varying political opinions and often extreme political opinions to drive out our policy here in the United States in a very different way. There's been changing sentiment towards China across the globe. And of course, the recent matter in Russia, right? So again, world dynamics continue to change. There have been elections across the globe in Latin America and across Europe, and the world is changing. And as compliance professionals, we need to think about how to navigate that change in a way that makes sense. So, and if you think about globalization from a cooperation and a collaboration perspective, when the world is globalized, we're all getting along. It is safe to say again that collaboration and cooperation creates more collaboration and cooperation from a compliance perspective. And that means there's less corruption, right? corruption is often generated as a result of businesses that need to get business done, and are no longer operating in a cooperative environment. We've got an environment of unrest, but business still needs to get done, and businesses still need to move forward, and transactions still need to take place. But in an environment where there's little or no collaboration or cooperation, or the sentiment has changed, and in that regard, the laws and regulations have changed to make our roles more difficult, right? And the ability to comply more difficult. We've got an ever-changing world, and we've got to think about our programs in a new and different way to navigate that world. So I've got a short poll for you here. I'm sorry. So what is corruption, right? So as we think about the world changing, the corruption index also changes. As I mentioned, in a globalized environment, the people get along more. There's less opportunity for corruption. There is less opportunity to get things done in a way that may be unethical or controversial. And so as we move forward, corruption is changing, and corruption is not always the same for every country, right? Corruption often looks different in different organizations and in different corporations, right? What may be seen as corrupt here in the United States may not be seen as corrupt in another nation state. And so we've got to manage corruption in a way where there's a set of global laws and regulations, right? And that's the challenge of the multinationals, is the multinationals have to manage those corruption opportunities and think about them in the way that the laws and the regulations impose on them. And what does that mean for the organizations? And so from a laws and regulations perspective, we've got to manage what is required from us, whether it's the UK Bribery Act, US FCPA regulations, and just because in the United States or in the UK, bribery is looked at in a certain way, this may look a little bit different in Asia or in Latin America, and what their sentiment is towards corruption or what may be permissible and seen as common sort of cultural behaviors may be different, right? And so, again, we're navigating through an ever-changing world, a very dynamic geopolitical climate, a climate of some level of unrest, a climate of less globalization and less cooperation, but we have all those laws and regulations that are coming together to tell us how to behave as a multinational corporation. And so again, it's not just about bribery now that we need to think about from a corruption standpoint. Corruption can look a lot bigger and broader than just bribery. There could be fraud, right? Other unethical and illicit behavior, whether internally in our own organizations, externally with our partners, or even externally from our consumers or our clients, right? So bribery and corruption and overall compliance is changing and navigating. And so I would also argue that anti-bribery and anti-corruption programs need to navigate with that. So it's no longer just looking at compliance from strictly a bribery perspective in your anti-bribery and anti-corruption program. You've got to look at your entire compliance portfolio and how do we put that all together so it makes sense for your organization and for what you're seeing in your specific industries, with your specific partners, and with your employees. Right? So compliance, again, is no longer just bribery. It goes beyond bribery. And as a multinational corporation, I am fully an advocate that compliance does not look the same for every organization, right? We are all seated in different corporations. We are headquartered in different countries. Our corporate leaders may have different risk appetites for compliance. Our tolerance levels may be different. Our industries are different. Our products are different. Our employees are different. And so there's no one size fits all to a compliance program. It really must be a compliance by design for your organization and what fits best for you and the way that you conduct business and the type of global footprint that you're operating in. right? And again, as the world is changing, compliance can't just be a design once and then let it sit, right? The compliance program needs to migrate and change and evolve and develop organically and inorganically as the world is changing and as your corporations are adjusting to all those world changes. So they've got to be flexible, they've got to be scalable, and they've got to be able to evolve and develop as you and your organization evolves and develops. So considerations for a compliance program, well, there's money, right? We've got to think about how does bribery and corruption fit your industry, right? What are you seeing from industry trends and industry perspectives and the way that your corporation does business? What are the opportunities for corruption and for bribery? What do you have? How are your books and records sorted? Are you able to see what is happening with your books and records? Could you identify a corporate bribe? Could you identify fraud? Could you identify some form of corruption? And are you able to identify where your organization is connecting with those politically exposed peoples that may result in a bribery of a government official or a bribery of a government organization? Are you weighing all those matters in a way that makes sense, again, for your specific organization and your compliance by design? And so what risks does your organization face? In most multinationals, we often get caught up with the day-to-day. We're looking at the tactical approvals that we have, the requests that are coming in, the contacts that our employees are sending us, and requests from our business partners, and questions that we're getting from the business. So we end up in a very tactical mode where there's often not the opportunity in our day and age to step back and say, what should the program look like rather than what does it look like? So I like to encourage big multinationals, especially like Coke and like your organization, to often take that time to step back from the tactical and think about your risks and think about how do you manage those risks in a way, again, that makes sense for your individual business, your industry, your company, your leadership, and your employees. And again, risk-based compliance will look different for everyone. It will depend on your industry. It'll depend on your company's risk appetite. It'll depend on the regulations, those that impact your organization and those that may not impact your organization. You know, we are constantly operating in a world of multiple jurisdictions where perhaps many of you are like me, where we've got to think about not just US law, right, but EU law, UK laws, and other laws across the world that are driving our organizations and how we can comply. And so we are faced with multiple jurisdictions, multiple different industries, different risk appetites, and putting that all together in a program that makes sense can often be very challenging. In addition to that, it's no secret that most compliance programs have limited budget and limited resources these days. And so as our world is getting more complex, the laws are getting more complex, the jurisdictions are getting more complex, our companies are getting more complex, we're asked to do more, manage more, be more in a way that makes sense for our organization with a lot less. And so we've got to think about it in a smart way. How do we manage things with limited resources and limited funding, potentially, while all of these moving pieces and parts are coming together? And so when you think about your program, you know, how do you run an effective anti-bribery program? Well, I like to call it smart compliance, right? So I like to make my program work smarter, not harder. And my team members work smarter and not harder. So can you think about what risks impact your organization? What systems can you implement to help you? How should your resources be focused? What opportunities do you have for bribery and compliance, right? Where do they impact your individual business? What does your training program look like? What is your risk appetite with your leadership, right? So we've got to put that all together in a really smart way. And the smart way is to think about the fundamentals again, take a step back and say, what do you need to run your business in a way? What do you need to protect your organization from potential bribery, from potential corruption? Maybe not just from an anti-bribery and anti-corruption laws and regulation perspective, but from your global ethics and compliance policies and programs, right? And how can we collaborate on those and make them more effective for an organization in a way that makes sense? Again, focusing your resources on what matters most, making sure you have your policies and your procedures and your fundamentals in place. What systems can you implement to make life easier for you? Are there questionnaires that you can provide your business? Is there artificial intelligence that can run on the back end of some of your systems to mitigate out of some of the low risk opportunities and really focus your resources on the high risk opportunities? Are you looking at collaborating with your other systems and your other compliance programs to manage these risks? For example, your sanctions screenings program, many of them have opportunities to screen for politically exposed persons. Are you taking advantage of that? Are you looking at opportunities where there may be government officials either working for managing a board member of one of your strategic partners? Are you identifying that in some of your sanction screening? And are you looking at how to implement that and review those in a way that makes sense for your organizations? A complex business like Coca-Cola, we have corporate sponsorships. So we look at compliance not just from the tactical side of what we do and the day-to-day and our regular engagement and our interaction, but we also look at it from a corporate perspective. What do our sponsorships need to look like? How do we be a good corporate citizen? How do we make sure that there's no opportunity for corruption in some of our larger, broader sponsorship events? And putting that together, again, in a way that makes sense. So the anti-bribery program really should consist of, again, your fundamentals, your policies, your procedures, and your resources and your systems. But how do you layer that? And again, how do you take that step back to make sure that the fundamentals are being met and that all of those key elements of your program can evolve, can develop, can be scalable, right, as the business changes? And so I would like to recommend that from a multinational perspective is that it's really encouraging if you take that moment and that pause. And again, we get very caught up in the tactical side of what we're doing. As compliance professionals, we often get caught up in the day-to-day. We don't take that opportunity to step back and to engage with others and to think about our business and to think about where our business is going and how it is growing and how the world is changing. But it is encouraging if you can take that moment to pause and reflect, right, and evaluate and give yourself an assessment of your risks, not only based on what your current program is and what your objectives are, but maybe where the world is heading. So as political sentiment changes, are you ready for it, right? Are you ready to manage perhaps a larger corruption index, more opportunities for bribery or fraud within your business? Are you ready for your business to change or to migrate with the different political interactions that are taking place and the sentiment being a bit differently and corruption on the rise? So again, can you create a program that is flexible, scalable, and ever evolving to keep your organization moving forward in a very organic and inorganic way? So with that, I'd like to close it out with a poll for you all. I'm very curious to see if you all are in the same position as me where you've seen change over the last 5 to 8 years in your anti-bribery and anti-corruption program. Have you seen the political dynamics really drive out your program? What does that look like? Are you taking it into account? And it looks like many of you are moderately impacted, right? By the political dynamics. Some of you have said you were significantly impacted, and some of you are saying somewhat, right? So as we think about these going forward, it looks like a broad number of us are obviously impacted by the different geopolitical sentiments coming up and how these dynamics are impacting our business and the opportunity for corruption in these dynamics. But as we're moving forward, I would encourage you all to think about that differently. Again, take time to pause, take time to reflect, take time to step back and really evaluate your program and what you need to have, what you must have. Align with your organizations on your appetite for risk and what your focus would be. And if you are like many compliance programs where you may have limited resources and limited funding, think smart. Think about how to maximize your resources, how to maximize your systems, how to maximize your collaboration with your other compliance programs, whether it be your ethics and compliance program, your sanctions compliance program, your trade compliance programs, and put together a comprehensive program that makes the most sense for your organization. So with that, we've got a few minutes left in the session, so I'm going to turn it over for a quick Q&A if there's any questions coming out of our discussion.
Much for sharing your vast knowledge. Now, we will take a look now at some questions from the viewer. I think we have one question and time for one question. So I'll see what pops up now on the screen. Thank you, Nellie Thomas, for sending your question in. So the question is, how is growing data privacy laws in US? How do the growing data privacy laws in the US impact compliance concerns for the Coca-Cola organization at the moment? Did you hear me? Did you hear the question? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, very much so. So yes, I would say for both the US side and from the EU side, right, Coke has to manage both sets of regulations. And so from a data privacy perspective, we're looking at them very heavily. We have a dedicated team towards data privacy. We're managing those laws and regulations across the various aspects of our business from a systems perspective.